You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space, our Twilight Zone retrospective and absolute analysis. No more definitive investigation of this series is ever going to happen again, at least not in the Twilight Zone. And now we are going to be talking about episode 2 of season 1, One for the Angels. An aging stallman or huckster, I suppose, is approached by death and given an opportunity to hold off until he gives the sale of a lifetime, or as he puts it, one for the angels. However, then a small girl is hit by a car, and he then has the choice of giving that and giving up his life and saving the girl, or staying on for a bit longer. So Julian, what are your thoughts then on One for the Angels?
I think, like the first episode, this is also a weaker one. This is a sort of play on death. We've seen that sort of thing before. There's nothing wrong with it. And we see it again. I think in particular, this concept of like, I'm a pitch man. First of all, we don't use that term anymore, right? He's a street salesman. The idea that like he's holding on for that one great pitch, is a bit absurd. Although the actor does a great job of selling it. And when he really is pitching death at the end to distract him from the kid. And I did find myself being touched by that, being touched by the sort of basic humanity. It is a little aged in the sense that, like today, you think, why are you sending your little girl up to this old man's apartment, alone? Like today, like it's like he loves children. Yeah, that's a little creepy, man.
Yeah. I don't know if that's an indictment of our times, but yes, it did. It definitely sort of felt that, where I'm like, this guy lives on his own. He's lived in this room, and he has this job as a pitchman. Yet all the kids sort of know him and hang out with him. I suppose it's a different time and that sort of thing. But I agree with your point about this being the weak one. Again, this is very much summed up in that thing of like, he attempts to cheat death, but then his humanity wins through because there's got to be a replacement. And it's a very simple message. However, what I would say with this episode that I really enjoyed is actually just the how it's carried out, the actual sort of putting that into practice. One of my favourite bits of this is he's looking to ways, because the actor as well, I know him as sort of like, he voiced all kinds of few Disney characters, and he's I believe he played Clarence the Angel in It's a Wonderful Life. So I've known him from these different things, but then he's trying to come up with something, just this one thing that he's like, all right, well, look, because the death says to him, look, if you've got some big thing that, could benefit humanity, then, yeah, we could probably give you a bit more time. And he's trying to come up with this one thing, and he's like, well, I've never given a big pitch before. I want to do this. And the fact that death gives in is like, isn't great, but I do like the fact that when he does that, and he tries to walk away, and death just keeps appearing as he's walking down the stairs and stuff, it's done really well. Like, it's a really well put together. Technically, it just flows really well. That you don't sort of go, I'm pulled in. At no point am I going, oh, that's an edit, whatever. Like, they don't need special effects. They don't need anyone just poof appearing out of nowhere. He's just there at the next, as he goes around the corner, he's just at the bottom of the stairs, or as he goes around the corner, he's now stood at the door frame, and these sorts of things. And I love that little bit of sort of like really simple idea, but technically pulled off incredibly well.
Yeah, I agree. For me, what I like him on the staircase, right?
Yes,
I like going down.
He keeps disappearing. Yeah.
For me, what stuck with me was the touching of the flower. We were talking before the show about sort of like old school structure, right? It's just solidly knowing how to write. And that comes through so much in these episodes, that Serling knows how to write. And the standards on the show are great. Now, one cliche of the show is that anytime you have like a moment of realization, it's stretched out because you got to pad it to fill 30 minutes, right? So there's usually like, I think to our current taste, we look at it and we're like, yeah, it's death already, and this is a recurring theme on the show. Having said that, now when I watch movies, I think, when you are in that situation, you should at least have a few lines where you get to play with the idea that the character doesn't know, but the audience knows. That's fun. Just give us a few lines. You don't have to gild the lily or extend it like this. But sometimes I think in sort of overreaction to this in modern cinema and modern TV, you just go straight to everybody recognizes it. And I think the touching of the plant and watching that flower droop and die, it's, again, like you said, very low tech, but such a simple visual shorthand to just prove, oh shit, you're dead.
Yeah, and that's what it continues throughout this episode, because that's a great moment. This episode has got like a couple of sets and stuff, but it's a very one of the things that I think this runs through the series of you and I've also be like the small stories. And this feels like a very small story. Like, there's all these little moments, and in the grand scheme of things, in the whole universe, this little girl's life doesn't really mean a great deal when she's hit by the car. Yet to this pitchman, this gentleman, like it's his fault. He feels like it's his fault, like because Death makes the point. Well, I can't go back empty-handed. I've come down here for a purpose. I've got to take back a soul, or I've got to take back whatever it is. They don't actually say, but. And I like that moment of sort of like to Death. He's not being vindictive. This isn't a sort of like a gotcha moment. It's not like he's like, well, you got one over me, so now I've got one over you. It's not that. It's just a technicality. And it's that small story was like, well, convenient, really, more than anything. So I'm taking the little girl, and you've got until midnight. And you say about the storytelling, I just like the fact that this is. The death in this reminded me of Neil Gaiman's Death. In just the pragmatism of it, like, well, people die. I'm here to claim them. That's all there is. There's something beautiful in that, but it's not. I don't do it for fun. It's what it just happens.
Well, he's sort of a bureaucrat. He reminded me of what's that Brad Pitt movie where he plays Death?
Meet Joe Black.
Okay, yeah. Better forgotten, but he reminded me of that. I kind of love the actor who plays Death. I think he sort of steals the show, and he's very dispassionate, but he's very smooth. He's like a competent bureaucrat. I mean, he's almost like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy version of Death or something. Yes.
Yeah.
I will say that. I love the opening shot of the Robbie the Robot toys, and there's the eye sticker on them. There's an eye sticker on his sort of dome, which reminds me of the eye on the ophthalmologist in the first episode, and there is a sort of like eye motif throughout the Twilight Zone. I will say that in terms of like his bargaining with Death, it's clever. I get what you're doing, but one of the unfortunate side effects is like the implication that people kind of deserve it when they die. Like he says, like, I don't intervene in accidents, but you can make the appeals, and the appeals are hardship, which is like to your family or your loved ones. Okay, does that mean that Palestinians don't really have loved ones? Like what does that mean for the Holocaust?
Yeah.
Major importance, like, oh yeah, people who die young, they're just not important, right? Unfinished business, there is a kind of like, bad Christian kind of implication of like, though everything is in its place and the world is just right.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, from a story point of view, they're trying to give you three get outs that the pitchman can't achieve. It's clear that they've gone, okay, here's the three things. It's, are you going? Because that's the thing, isn't it? Like, okay, does your death incur such hardship that to those around you and stuff? And they said it makes no sense because there's people that die every day that it does. But he's like, well, no, I haven't got any family or kids, and it's trying to. They use it to hammer home who he is. Technically he's got no. It sounds horrible to say, but he's got no worth. He's got no family and kids. and they're not that important. I actually went off on one about something about this similar recently, but like, he hasn't got any family, so he's not going to be hardship. Is he going to do with anything of import for humanity? Well, no, he's a small person, because they keep referring to him as a little man, don't they? The narration refers to him as little man, and then is he going to have any unfinished business? And that's where he hits him and goes, "Oh yes, I've never had a big pitch," and it's almost like Death almost has sympathy for him. And he's like, "All right, I'm going to give you this one, but you've got to go and do this big pitch." And it is almost a little bit unkind, because there is that thing of he's going, now I've caught you out because I'm never going to pitch again, which makes me almost immortal, sort of thing. And it's like, well, I could, maybe he could have said, well, if I'm not taking you, I've got to take somebody else. Like, that's the way it works, and that's held until he sees the little girl. So it's not played as a gotcha moment, but it's a clear sort of like, oh, you didn't read the fine print of this scenario, which is again that bureaucratic sort of approach.
Yeah, and I thought the sort of like appeals are very bureaucratic. You know? Yeah, I mean, I do want to say about the sort of his choice to die instead. It is very heartwarming, and I think that Serling has characters who are just mean bad guys. But the world has those people in it, but there is a kind of like Americana to the Twilight Zone. And I will say, I'm touched by his decision. Like, of course, I would make that same choice.
Yeah,
like, I want to live, but this little girl has her whole life ahead of her. Of course, I'll do the right thing.
It's the way he does it as well, though. Like, it's the fact that he basically just walks off, grabs his pitch. The only thing he can do, because he gets given this time, it's the only thing he can do. Like, there's no heroic moments. There's no sort of like big bombast. It's all right. Well, the only thing I can do is you've got to take me in turn. You've got to take me in instead. And so he grabs his suitcase and he opens it up, and the guy's like, Death is sat there going, well, there's nobody around. Like, who are you selling to? And being as experienced, well, they'll come, don't you worry, there's always someone, and then he ends obviously selling to Death, but it's the only thing he can do. And he's like, if this is all I can do, then this is what I'm going to do. Like, I can't, there's no super heroic moment, this is all I've got to give. And I kind of find that sort of heartwarming as well. Like, whatever, this is all I've got, and so I'm going to give this. And then he gives that pitch. But it's done with humor as well. Like, I like the fact that it's not done with melodrama. It's not done with, which makes it more heartwarming. Like the fact that like Death's getting like his ties undone, he's getting sweaty, and he's like, "Hey, right, I want more of these. How you sell what? These ties? These sound amazing. I'll take 5 of them." And he's like, by the end it comes back and like he's got all these ties draped over his arm, and he's bought all this other crap, and it's like, I'm digging that like Death has fallen for it, and he's like, yeah, that was as he says, sort of like one for the angels, that big pitch. Do you think Death did it on purpose?
Yeah, well, I was going to say this, that my theory is, I do find it charming how enthralled Death is by this pitch. Of course, it's totally ridiculous. But yeah, my theory is this is all planned by Death from the start, right? And that this is to get him to make his peace with Death, but it's also to get him to recognize that, yeah, he was a small man, but that he lives on in those children that he loved. And that he, one of the earliest scenes is him distributing these toys to these kids, and he's not charging them, So clearly he was a salesman. He was scraping by. I do kind of feel like Rod Serling, is like, this is my version of Death of a salesman, it's an insignificant figure. But yeah, I do think, it's all a scheme, and he realizes that, the sort of old cliche, but it is touching in this episode of sort of we live on in the people who we touch. And I identify with this, you might want to be the best writer ever and, the battle rock star. But at the end of the day, it's the family and the people who you've touched that, you live on through.
No,
you agree?
No, I do. I totally. And that was my point. I honestly think, and I took there were 2 parts. And I think that exactly because Death goes. I like when Death says, "Oh, it's never happened in all the millenniums." Sort of like it's never happened. And when he's like, "Oh my god, I've missed the appointment," and I was like, "Oh, you've totally done this on purpose." But I love that. Like you say, up until this point, like I say, he's been so bureaucratic. He's been so straight down the line. Like there's no feeling in it, but he's willing to do this. But I think it's almost like, I wouldn't want to say a test, but you say I love this idea you say about him acknowledging and begin to understand that he lives on in these children. But more than that, the fact that like it's the way it's conveyed at the moment. Sort of the pitchman. I wish I remember the character's name, but he says, he says, "Okay, I'm coming with you." He says, "Is it up?" And Death says, "Oh yes, you made it." And it's like that last act was is almost like, that's your clincher. You've got no worries. Like you've done something. You were so selfless. Like you acknowledged the value of life, and you gave yours for this. It's such a touching moment. And then, like I say, it's so small and so simple. They just walk off down the street. And the thing I love more than anything is he takes his suitcase with him.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, that bad boy's going to heaven or wherever it is, and he's going to be pitching the moment he gets through those pearly gates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So no, it's like I say, it's still not a barnstormer, but there's a sentiment to this that I think people probably wouldn't like today. It's a final thought. I can see people saying, "Oh, this is a bit cringeworthy," or "It's a bit too sentimental." But I really enjoyed this episode. I think that it's well acted and it's technically well structured and carried out. So I'm still loving this series.
Final thoughts. It is heartwarming. I mean, I find myself choking up at that concept and at that story. And having said that, I still think it's a minor episode. It's still, but that's the power of the Twilight Zone.
Okay, well there you go. Final thoughts on that episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for One for the Angels. On the next episode, we'll get to the next episode. We'll get to the next episode of the Twilight Zone. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you in the next episode.